The Black Hawk helicopter landed in my front yard at exactly 11:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, its rotors whipping snow across the windows of houses where normal families were opening presents. Through the thunderous noise, I heard the pilot's voice over the loudspeaker. "Colonel Valentina Rodriguez, you're needed immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." But just 3 hours earlier, I'd been sitting alone in my empty kitchen, staring at a voicemail from my sister that would change everything I thought I knew about family, duty, and what it means to serve something greater than yourself. I'm Colonel Valentina Rodriguez, 34 years old, and I've spent the last 16 years of my life defending this country in places most people can't pronounce. I've led missions in the mountains of Karakistan, coordinated humanitarian aid in war-torn Valdoria, and earned 3 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart along the way. But none of that mattered to my family when they decided I wasn't worth a seat at their Christmas table. That morning had started like so many others in my small rental house in Millbrook Springs. Coffee, silence, and the familiar weight of being forgotten by the people who were supposed to love me most. The Christmas tree in my living room stood decorated but unvisited. Presents I'd bought for my family still wrapped underneath, waiting for a dinner invitation that would never come. The voicemail notification on my phone had been blinking since midnight. I'd ignored it through my morning run, through breakfast, through the kind of hollow holiday routine that military personnel know all too well. But something about the timestamp made me finally press play. 11:59 p.m., Christmas Eve. My sister Elena's voice, slightly slurred with wine and thick with the casual cruelty I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Hey Val, just wanted to let you know, Christmas dinner went amazing. Mom's ham was perfect, Dad actually smiled for once, and little Tommy got that bike he wanted. We had such a full house, the Hendersons came over, plus the Clarks and their kids. Even distant cousin Maria flew in from Portland. It was really special, you know? The kind of Christmas we always dreamed of as kids." There was a pause, the sound of clinking glasses and muffled laughter in the background. "I know we said we'd call, but honestly, with your schedule and all those deployments, we figured you'd be too busy anyway. You understand, right? Military stuff always comes first with you. Besides, Mom said something about how you never really fit in with family gatherings anyway. Too serious, I don't know, intense. It's not personal, Val. It's just easier when everyone can relax." The message ended with a cheerful "Merry Christmas" that hit like a slap across the face. I set the phone down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. This wasn't the first time, not even close. My high school graduation party that got canceled because my cousin's baby shower was more important for the family. The wedding shower for my brother's fiancé where I wasn't invited because military people make everyone uncomfortable talking about war. The countless birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays where my absence was explained away as duty calls, even when I was stateside with no deployment scheduled. But this Christmas morning, sitting in a house I'd bought with combat pay, surrounded by commendations and photos for missions where I'd saved lives and served with honor, the exclusion felt different. More final, like a door closing that I'd been trying to keep open for over a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. In 3 weeks, I was supposed to pin on my full colonel's eagles in a ceremony at Fort Braxton, making me one of the youngest female colonels in the Army's Special Operations Command. My personnel file read like a highlight reel of American military excellence. 2 tours in Karakistan, where I'd led a team that rescued 43 hostages from insurgent compounds, a deployment to Valdoria where my unit had established supply lines that saved thousands of civilian lives, and a classified mission in the Draconian Peninsula that earned me a personal commendation from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But none of that mattered to people who saw my uniform as a costume I put on to avoid real life. I walked to the window, looking out at Millbrook Springs' quiet suburban streets. Somewhere across town, my family was probably settling in for their traditional Christmas movie marathon, full and content and completely unburdened by my absence. My mother would be in her favorite chair, my dad would be dozing off during the boring parts, and Elena would be posting perfectly filtered photos to social media of their blessed family time. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. Bitter and forgotten, like so many family connections I'd tried to maintain across time zones and deployments. I'd sent presents again this year, thoughtful ones, expensive ones, things I'd picked up during my travels that I thought would mean something. A handcrafted silver bracelet from a village artisan in Karakistan for my mother, a rare book on Civil War history for my father, educational toys for my nephew Tommy that would help him learn about different cultures. All of it still sitting under their tree, probably pushed to the back behind gifts from people who'd actually been invited to participate in their lives. The house felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in under the weight of 16 years of accumulated rejection. I'd told myself for so long that family would come around, that eventually they'd see past the uniform to the person underneath, that my service meant something to people who shared my blood.
But as I stood there in my kitchen, still in my running gear, surrounded by the silence of a Christmas morning spent alone, I realized something that would change everything. I'd been fighting the wrong war. That's when the thunderous sound of rotor blades began approaching from the east, growing louder by the second, about to deliver a message that would remind me exactly who I really was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. This wasn't the first time my family had erased me from their important moments. As I stood in my kitchen, Elena's voicemail still echoing in my head, the memories came flooding back like fragments from old missions, sharp, painful, and impossible to ignore. The first cut had come during my junior year at West Point. I was 3 months away from graduation, ranked 5th in my class, when my brother David announced his engagement to Rebecca Thornton. The engagement party was planned for the same weekend as my final military exercises, the culmination of 4 years of brutal training that would determine my branch assignment and future career path. "Can't you just skip one training thing?" my mother had asked over the phone, her voice carrying that familiar tone of exasperation. "David's only getting engaged once. Your military stuff will always be there." When I tried to explain that missing final exercises would result in automatic failure and potential dismissal from the academy, she sighed dramatically. "See, this is exactly what we were worried about. You've become so rigid, so militaristic. You can't even prioritize family anymore." I graduated as a second lieutenant 2 months later. My parents attended the ceremony, but spent the entire time complaining about the heat, the crowds, and how boring the speeches were. During the reception, while other families took photos and celebrated their children's achievements, mine stood awkwardly by the punch bowl, checking their watches every 5 minutes. "When do you think we can leave?" my father had whispered to my mother, apparently forgetting I was standing right next to them. "This military pageantry gives me a headache." The pattern continued through my first deployment to Karakistan. While I was leading convoys through hostile territory and learning to sleep through mortar fire, my family was planning David's bachelor party. The date they chose? The exact weekend I'd arranged leave to come home, leave I'd requested 6 months in advance and had confirmed multiple times. "Oh, honey, we completely forgot," Elena had said when I called from a satellite phone at Forward Operating Base Crimson. The connection was crackling with static, and I could hear explosions in the distance. "But you understand, right? Boys' weekend, very exclusive. Besides, you'd probably just want to talk about war stuff all night." I'd hung up and gone back to my bunk, where I'd written them a letter trying to explain what my deployment really meant. The schools we were building, the medical supplies we were delivering, the families we were helping reunite. I never sent it. Somehow I knew they wouldn't read past the first paragraph anyway. 2 years later, when I earned my Bronze Star for leading a rescue mission that saved 12 civilians from a collapsed building during an earthquake relief operation, I called home with the news. My mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Oh, did Elena tell you she made partner at her law firm? We're so proud. She's having a celebration dinner next month. You should try to make it if you're not, doing military things." The celebration dinner was held on a Tuesday night at 6 p.m. I was in Valdoria, coordinating humanitarian aid drops to refugees. Even if I had been stateside, even if I had had leave, the timing made it clear they weren't actually expecting me to come. But the worst exclusion had happened just last year, during what should have been one of the proudest moments of my career. I had been selected for the Advanced Strategic Leadership Program at the Pentagon, a prestigious assignment that would set me up for promotion to full colonel. Only 30 officers across all branches were chosen each year. My family's reaction to the news was telling. My father had grunted and gone back to his newspaper. Elena had said, "More school? Aren't you getting a little old to still be a student?" And my mother had actually frowned. "Valentina, honey, don't you think it's time to consider settling down? Your cousin Maria just had her second baby and she's 2 years younger than you. All this career climbing, it's starting to look desperate." The irony was suffocating. While they saw my achievements as character flaws, I was being briefed by generals, trusted with classified information that affected national security, and leading soldiers who looked to me for guidance in life and death situations. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like tactical gear in desert heat. Refusing the mission wasn't an option. Code Black authorizations came with explicit orders that failure to comply constituted insubordination and potentially treason. But accepting it meant stepping into a situation where my entire future hung in the balance, where one wrong decision could destroy everything I'd sacrificed to achieve. I thought about Elena's voicemail, still saved on my phone, her casual dismissal of my military stuff that always came first. She had no idea that this military stuff involved life or death decisions that affected thousands of people, strategic planning that influenced international relations, and leadership responsibilities that most people could never comprehend. To her, my service was an inconvenience that made family gatherings awkward. She couldn't understand that moments like this, when my country needed me immediately, without question, on Christmas morning, were exactly why I'd chosen this life. The helicopter pilot's voice cut through the rotor noise again. "Colonel Rodriguez, 60 seconds. We have Americans in immediate danger." Americans in immediate danger. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Somewhere in the world, people were counting on the United States military to save them, and the Pentagon had determined that I was essential to that salvation. Whatever family drama had dominated my morning suddenly felt microscopic compared to the magnitude of what was being asked of me. I grabbed my gear bag and headed for the back door, pausing only to look at the Christmas tree in my living room one last time. The presents underneath, gifts for a family who hadn't bothered to include me in their celebration, seemed like artifacts from another person's life. In 30 seconds, I would step into that helicopter and toward a mission that could define the rest of my career. Success could mean promotion, command, and the kind of military legacy that outlasted personal disappointments. Failure could mean the end of everything I'd worked to become. But as I reached for the door handle, I realized something that had taken 16 years to understand. My family's opinion of my choices had never mattered as much as I'd thought. What mattered was this moment, this mission, and these Americans who needed me to be exactly who I'd trained to become. The helicopter was waiting. My country was calling. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't thinking about whether my family would be proud of what I was about to do. I climbed into the Black Hawk with 30 seconds to spare, my gear bag secured, and my mind already shifting into mission mode. But as the helicopter lifted off, banking hard toward the east, I made a decision that would prove more dangerous than any combat zone I'd ever entered. I called my family. The satellite phone crackled to life as we soared over the snow-covered hills of Western Virginia, heading toward what the pilot had identified as Joint Base Andrews. Through my headset, I could hear the familiar chaos of my family's Christmas morning. Laughter, conversations overlapping, the clink of mimosa glasses, and what sounded like my nephew Tommy playing with his new toys in the background. Elena answered on the fourth ring, her voice bright with holiday cheer and alcohol. "Hello? This is a weird number. Who is this?" "Elena, it's Valentina." I had to shout over the helicopter noise, even with the headset. "I need you to talk to Mom and Dad."
There was a pause, and I could hear her moving away from the noise. Val, where are you? It sounds like you're in a construction site. I'm in a military helicopter heading to a classified mission. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I might not be able to contact you for days, possibly weeks. If something happens to me, if you see my name in the news, I need you to know that. Oh my God, Val, seriously? Elena's voice turned sharp with irritation. It's Christmas morning. Can't you dial down the drama for one day? We're trying to have a nice family time here. The dismissal hit harder than expected, partly because I was watching the landscape blur past at 200 miles per hour heading toward a crisis that had prompted presidential intervention. Elena, this isn't drama. This is my job. I'm trying to tell you that your job, yes, we know. It's always your job, isn't it? Do you have any idea how exhausting it is constantly worrying about whether you're going to call with some life or death military emergency? Mom's been on edge all morning because she was afraid you'd pull something like this. Pull something like what? I didn't ask for this mission. I was sitting in my kitchen reading your voicemail about how wonderful Christmas was without me when a helicopter landed in my yard. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You turn everything into some big dramatic moment about your military career. We have one nice family Christmas, and somehow you make it about you. I felt the familiar knot forming in my chest, the same one that had been tightening for 16 years every time I tried to bridge the gap between who I was and who they wanted me to be. I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm trying to tell you that I love you all. And if something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong, Val, because you're not actually in danger. You just think you are because you watch too many military movies. Real life isn't that dramatic.
The pilot's voice crackled through my headset, informing me we'd be landing in 12 minutes and that I needed to review mission briefing materials. I pulled out the classified folder that had been waiting in my seat, scanning the first page while trying to maintain the conversation that was disintegrating in real time. What I read made my blood freeze. American embassy personnel in the small nation of Korvaska had been taken hostage by a separatist group with ties to international terrorism. Diplomatic negotiations had failed. Military intervention was the only option to prevent executions that were scheduled to begin in 6 hours. The mission required expertise in hostage rescue, urban warfare, and crisis negotiation, exactly the combination of skills I'd developed over 16 years of specialized training. Elena, I need you to put Mom on the phone. This is important. Mom's busy right now. She's taking pictures with Tommy, and you know how he gets when people interrupt his playtime. Can't this wait until after the holidays? No, it can't wait. There are American lives at stake, and I'm being deployed to... Oh, please. Elena's laugh was sharp and dismissive. American lives at stake? Valentina, you're not in some action movie. You're a mid-level military officer who probably handles paperwork most of the time. Stop trying to make yourself sound like some kind of superhero. The helicopter banked sharply as we approached the airfield, and through the window I could see transport planes being prepared for immediate deployment. Ground crews were loading equipment with the kind of urgency that indicated this mission had the highest possible priority. In the distance, I could make out other helicopters arriving, carrying what I assumed were additional members of the rapid response team. Elena, I am not trying to sound like anything. I'm trying to tell you that I might be going into a dangerous situation, and I wanted my family to know. Your family knows exactly what you want us to know, Val. You want us to think you're some kind of American hero, so we'll all feel guilty about not revolving our lives around your schedule. But here's the truth. We had a beautiful Christmas morning without walking on eggshells around your intensity, without listening to war stories, without pretending that your job is more important than everyone else's. The words landed like physical blows. I'd spent years trying to explain to them that I'd never claimed my job was more important than theirs, only that it required sacrifices they didn't understand. But Elena wasn't finished. You know what Mom said this morning? She said she was grateful you couldn't make it because everyone could actually relax. Dad didn't have to pretend to be interested in your military stories. David didn't have to watch what he said about politics. And the kids didn't have to listen to lectures about discipline and service. I closed my eyes, trying to process the revelation that my presence at family gatherings
wasn't just unwanted, it was actively harmful to their enjoyment. So you're saying you're all happier when I'm not there? I'm saying we're more ourselves when we don't have to perform for someone who judges everything we do by military standards. You make everyone uncomfortable, Val. You always have. The helicopter touched down with a hard thump, and immediately I could see uniformed personnel running toward us with equipment and briefing materials. The mission was beginning, whether I was emotionally ready or not. But Elena's words had opened a wound that 16 years of family dynamics had been building toward. I've never judged any of you. I've never made you perform for me. All I've ever wanted was to be included in... Included in what? Conversations about combat and deployments and classified missions? Stories about people dying in countries most of us can't pronounce? Valentina, we don't want to be included in your world because your world is terrifying and depressing and has nothing to do with normal family life. A uniformed officer appeared at the helicopter door, gesturing urgently for me to exit. The mission briefing was beginning in 3 minutes, and American hostages didn't have time for family therapy sessions. But Elena's next words stopped me cold. Maybe it's better this way, Val. Maybe you should stay in your military world with people who understand it, and let us stay in ours where we don't have to pretend that what you do matters to us. Because honestly, it doesn't. It never has. The line went dead. Through the helicopter window, I could see teams of Special Forces operators preparing for what would likely be one of the most dangerous missions of my career. In 2 hours, I might be rappelling into a hostile urban environment to save American lives. In 6 hours, I might be dead. And my family had just told me they were happier without me in their lives. I stepped out of the helicopter into the cold December air, carrying gear that represented 16 years of training and a heart that had just been shattered by the people who were supposed to love me most. The mission ahead would test every skill I'd developed as a soldier. But nothing in my military training had prepared me for the realization that I'd been fighting for the approval of people who fundamentally disapproved of everything I'd chosen to become. The mission briefing room at Joint Base Andrews buzzed with controlled chaos as intelligence officers spread satellite images across every available surface, and communications specialists tested encrypted channels. I was still reeling from Elena's words when a familiar voice cut through the tactical noise like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "Rodriguez, thank God they got you here fast." I turned to see General Patricia Ashworth striding across the room, her silver hair pulled back in the same precise bun she'd worn since I first met her 8 years ago during my first deployment to Karakistan. At 58, Ashworth commanded more respect in military circles than most officers achieved in entire careers, and she had a reputation for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense with the efficiency of a laser-guided missile. But what made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion was the genuine relief in her eyes when she reached me. After Elena's brutal dismissal, seeing someone who actually wanted me present felt like oxygen after suffocation. "General Ashworth, I came as soon as I received the call," I snapped to attention, but she waved off the formality. "Cut the protocol, Valentina. We don't have time, and I need you thinking like an operator you are, not like a parade ground soldier." She gestured toward a corner of the room where we could speak privately. "Besides, after what you're about to walk into, I figure we're well past standing on ceremony." General Ashworth had been my commanding officer during my second tour in Karakistan, where I'd earned my first Bronze Star under her leadership. But more than that, she'd been the first senior officer to recognize that my skills extended beyond standard infantry operations. She'd recommended me for special operations training, pushed for my acceptance into advanced tactical programs, and written the recommendation letter that had gotten me into the Pentagon's Strategic Leadership Program. "I need to ask you something personal before we dive into this briefing," she said, studying my face with the kind of attention that missed nothing. "You look like someone just told you your dog died. What's going on?" For a moment, I considered deflecting with the standard military response. "Personal issues don't affect mission performance, ma'am." But something in General Ashworth's expression reminded me of conversations we'd had during late nights at Forward Operating Base Crimson when she'd talked about the unique challenges facing women in combat roles and the importance of having someone who understood the costs of this life. "I just had a conversation with my family," I said carefully. "They made it clear that they're happier when I'm not part of their lives. Apparently, my presence makes everyone uncomfortable, and what I do for a living doesn't matter to them. Your family said that to you? Today? While you're being deployed on a hostage rescue mission? They don't know it's a hostage rescue mission. They think I'm exaggerating the importance of my work. My sister called it drama and said I'm not actually in danger because real life isn't that dramatic. Jesus Christ. General Ashworth shook her head, then fixed me with a look that was part maternal fury and part commanding officer determination. Valentina, I need you to listen to me very carefully because I'm about to tell you something that might save your sanity and possibly your life. She glanced around the briefing room where teams of operators were reviewing floor plans of the embassy compound and testing communications equipment. You see all these people? Every single one of them volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come home. They left their families on Christmas morning because American citizens needed them, and not one of them had to explain or justify that decision to the people who claimed to love them. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating military culture, but underneath it was something more personal. Your family doesn't understand what you do because they've never been asked to do it. They've never had to make life or death decisions under pressure, never had to choose between personal comfort and national duty, never had to carry the weight of knowing that other people's survival depends on their competence. I felt something loosening in my chest, a knot of shame and self-doubt that had been tightening since Elena's phone call. But shouldn't they at least try to understand? Shouldn't family support matter? Family support matters when it's genuine. But what you're describing isn't lack of support. It's active undermining. They're asking you to apologize for being excellent at something that requires excellence. They're asking you to diminish yourself so they can feel comfortable with their own choices. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a woman in military dress uniform standing next to a man in a suit and 2 teenage boys. This is my daughter, Sarah Ashworth, my son-in-law, Mike, and my grandsons. Sarah's a helicopter pilot, deployed 8 months out of every year. When she calls home from Afghanistan, Mike doesn't tell her she's being dramatic. He asks how he can support her mission and takes care of their boys so she can focus on bringing American soldiers home safely.
She put the phone away and stepped closer, her voice dropping to the tone she'd used during pre-mission briefings, when she wanted to make sure every word landed with precision. Valentina, in about 20 minutes, you're going to walk into a situation where American lives depend on your training, your judgment, and your willingness to risk everything for people you've never met. That's not drama. That's the highest form of human service. But they make me feel like I'm selfish for choosing this life. Because they can't imagine choosing it themselves, she said firmly. They can't conceive of caring about strangers more than personal comfort, so they assume you're lying about your motivations. They think you chose military service to escape family responsibilities, or to feel important, or to prove something. They can't understand that you chose it because you're the kind of person who runs toward danger when others need help. Around us, the briefing room was reaching peak intensity as final preparations began. Radio checks echoed across the space, weapons were being distributed, and satellite intelligence was being updated in real time. The controlled chaos of a special operations mission coming together reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this life in the first place. The precision, the teamwork, the sense of being part of something that mattered beyond individual concerns. Here's what you need to understand, General Ashworth said, her voice cutting through my emotional fog like a command directive. Your family's approval was never the measure of your worth. Their comfort was never more important than your calling, and their inability to understand your service says everything about them and nothing about you. She gestured toward the operators preparing for the mission. These people understand you. They value what you bring to this team. They trust you with their lives because you've proven yourself worthy of that trust. That's your real family, Valentina. The people who see your strength and ask you to use it, not the people who see your strength and ask you to hide it. The mission coordinator called for final briefing in 2 minutes, and General Ashworth placed a hand on my shoulder. Your sister thinks you're not actually in danger because she's never faced real danger.
Your parents think your job isn't important because they've never been responsible for anything more critical than holiday dinner arrangements. But in 6 hours, you're going to save American lives that would be lost without your expertise." She paused, letting that sink in before delivering what felt like a benediction. "When this mission is over, when those hostages are safe, when you've once again proven that excellence in service is the highest calling a person can answer, remember this moment. Remember that there are people who understand what you do, who value who you are, and who would rather have you exactly as you are than comfortable and diminished." The mission coordinator called my name, and I realized it was time to focus on the mission that would define the next phase of my career. But General Ashworth's words had done something Elena's rejection couldn't touch. They'd reminded me that my family's inability to value my service was their limitation, not my failure. For the first time since stepping off that helicopter, I felt ready to be exactly who I'd trained to become. The mission briefing had been underway for 30 minutes when intelligence officer, Captain Derek Morrison, dropped a folder onto the conference table that made every operator in the room go silent. The satellite photos spilling out weren't just of the embassy compound in Corvasca, where American diplomats were being held hostage. They showed something far worse. "We have a problem," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the kind of tension that preceded very bad news. "The situation in Corvasca isn't isolated. Intelligence indicates this is a coordinated operation across 3 countries targeting American interests simultaneously." I felt the familiar chill that came with scope creep in military operations, the moment when what appeared to be a contained crisis revealed itself as part of something much larger and more dangerous. Around the table, special operations veterans who'd seen everything from urban warfare to international terrorism were leaning forward with the kind of attention that meant we were no longer dealing with a standard hostage rescue. "Show them the intercepts," General Ashworth ordered, her expression grim. Morrison activated the overhead screen displaying a series of translated communications that had been intercepted over the past 12 hours. As I read through them, my stomach dropped. The separatist group holding the embassy wasn't acting alone. They were coordinating with similar organizations in Valdoria and Thessia, planning synchronized attacks on American facilities that would begin the moment negotiations broke down in any one location. "How many Americans are we talking about?" asked Major Collins, the team leader for assault operations. 43 in Corvasca, 37 in Valdoria, and 52 in Thessia, Morrison replied. "But that's just diplomatic personnel. We're also tracking approximately 200 American civilians, business travelers, aid workers, journalists, who are currently trapped in the affected regions as borders close and transportation shut down." The number hit the room like a physical weight. This wasn't a single hostage situation anymore. This was a coordinated assault on American presence across an entire region, with over 300 American lives hanging in the balance. The kind of crisis that would dominate international headlines for months and potentially reshape foreign policy for years. "What's the timeline?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "The groups have synchronized their ultimatums. If any one location doesn't receive their demands within 6 hours, all 3 sites initiate what they're calling final protocols. Based on intercepted communications, that means executing hostages on live broadcast to maximize international impact."
General Ashworth stood, her command presence filling the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking at is the most complex multi-theater hostage rescue operation in special operations history. 3 simultaneous insertions, 3 different hostile environments, and 0 margin for error. If any team fails, Americans die in all 3 locations." The weight of that responsibility settled over the room like lead. I'd trained for high-stakes missions, but never anything approaching this scale of complexity and consequence. This wasn't just about proving my worth as an officer anymore. This was about preventing an international catastrophe that would redefine America's position in the region. But Morrison wasn't finished with the bad news. There's another complication. Intelligence suggests these groups have been monitoring American military communications for months.
They know our standard operational procedures, our typical response times, and our preferred extraction methods. Everything we normally rely on has been compromised. Which means we improvise, Major Collins said grimly. No standard playbook, no established protocols. We're writing new doctrine in real time. As the magnitude of the situation settled over me, I realized this mission represented everything my family had never understood about military service. Elena's dismissive comment about me not being in real danger suddenly felt not just ignorant, but almost insulting. Within hours, I would be leading part of an operation where failure meant not just my own death, but the execution of hundreds of American civilians on international television. Rodriguez, General Ashworth called my attention. Based on your analysis of the Korvaska facility way out, what's your assessment of approach vectors? I studied the satellite imagery, my mind automatically shifting into the tactical analysis mode that had been drilled into me through years of advanced training. The embassy compound has 3 potential entry points, but intelligence suggests the hostage takers have anticipated standard breach protocols. We'll need to create a diversion at the primary entrance while executing insertions at 2 secondary locations simultaneously. Explain your reasoning. The intercepts show they're expecting us to prioritize speed over stealth, assuming we'll breach the main entrance with overwhelming force to minimize hostage exposure time. But if they're monitoring our communications and know our procedures, they'll have concentrated defensive positions exactly where doctrine says we should attack. I pointed to a section of the compound's eastern wall. However, this service entrance connects to utility tunnels that weren't included in the original embassy blueprints. If we can access the municipal engineering records for the district, we might be able to identify approach routes they haven't considered. Major Collins nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Rodriguez, I want you leading the secondary insertion team for Korvaska. The assignment hit me like electricity. Leading an insertion team on a mission of this magnitude would be the most significant command responsibility of my career. Success would establish me as one of the premier tactical operators in Special Operations Command. Failure would mean dead Americans and a destroyed career, assuming I survive to have a career. Sir, I'm honored by the assignment, but I need to point out that I've never led a team in this type of urban environment, I said, knowing that honesty about limitations could save lives. Which is exactly why you're the right choice, General Ashworth interjected. Every other team leader in this room has extensive urban warfare experience, which means they think in predictable patterns. The enemy has studied those patterns. You're going to think differently because you don't have established habits to fall back on. Morrison pulled up additional intelligence files. There's something else you need to know. These separatist groups aren't acting independently. We have strong evidence suggesting they're being supported by a hostile nation-state that wants to damage American influence in the region. This operation is designed to make the United States look weak and ineffective on the international stage. The geopolitical implications were staggering. If American Special Operations Forces failed to rescue these hostages, it wouldn't just be a tragedy, it would be a propaganda victory for hostile nations seeking to diminish American power. The mission had evolved from hostage rescue to defense of national credibility. What kind of support are we talking about? I asked. Advanced weaponry, sophisticated communications equipment, and tactical advisors who've studied American military doctrine extensively. These aren't improvised terrorist groups. They're well-funded, well-trained, and well-informed about how we operate. The briefing room fell silent as the full scope of what we were facing became clear. This wasn't just the most complex operation in Special Operations history. It was potentially a defining moment for American military effectiveness in the modern era. The kind of mission that would be studied in military academies for decades, either as an example of exceptional operational success or catastrophic failure. General Ashworth called for a 10-minute break before final operational planning. And as the room began to clear, I found myself thinking about Elena's phone call again. She'd accused me of dramatizing my military service, of making myself sound like some kind of superhero for attention. But sitting in that briefing room, surrounded by satellite images of 3 hostile compounds and intelligence reports about hundreds of American lives hanging on the balance, I realized that the reality of my service was far more dramatic than anything I'd ever described to my family. They never understood that moments like this, when the phone rings at Christmas morning and the fate of American citizens depends on your willingness to risk everything, were exactly why people like me chose this life. Elena thought my job was about paperwork and military pageantry. In 6 hours, I would be rappelling into a hostile compound where any mistake could trigger the execution of innocent Americans.
As I prepared for the most dangerous mission of my career, I found myself grateful that my family's opinion no longer felt like the measure of my worth, because the Americans trapped in those compounds didn't care whether my family understood my service. They just needed me to be exactly who I'd trained to become. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt like enough. During the operational planning break, I stepped outside the briefing room to clear my head and found myself face to face with a revelation that would change everything I thought I understood about my relationship with military service. Sergeant Major William Torino was waiting in the corridor, holding a thick manila folder with my name written across the top in block letters. "Colonel Rodriguez, I need to show you something," he said, his weathered face carrying an expression I'd never seen before. Something between respect and what looked almost like guilt. "It's about why you're really here." Torino had been a fixture in Special Operations Command for over 20 years, the kind of career non-commissioned officer who knew more about actual military operations than most generals. He'd served under my father during the Gulf War, worked with every major tactical unit in the Army, and had a reputation for brutal honesty that made colonels nervous and privates grateful. "I don't understand," I said, taking the folder. "I'm here because I have the tactical expertise for urban warfare and hostage rescue." "That's what they told you," Torino replied. "And it's true, as far as it goes, but it's not the whole truth." He gestured toward a small conference room down the hall. "We need to talk privately, and you need to see what's in that folder before you walk into this mission." Inside the folder was a collection of documents that initially seemed routine: performance evaluations, mission reports, recommendations for advanced training. But as I read more carefully, a pattern emerged that made my stomach tighten with a familiar sense of betrayal. Every major assignment I'd received over the past 8 years, every specialized training program, every high-profile mission that had built my reputation had been carefully orchestrated. "Colonel Rodriguez, what is this?" I asked, holding up a memorandum dated 3 years earlier that recommended me for the Pentagon's Strategic Leadership Program. "That's a directive from the Office of Strategic Personnel Management," he said quietly. "It's a program most officers never hear about. The Pentagon identifies military personnel with specific combinations of skills, background, and psychological profiles, then guides their career development to prepare them for situations exactly like this one." I flipped through more documents, finding recommendations that had shaped my entire military trajectory. My assignment to Karakistan hadn't been random. It had been calculated to give me experience with international terrorism. My deployment to Valdoria hadn't been standard rotation. It had been designed to develop my humanitarian crisis management skills. Even my selection for urban warfare training had been part of a systematic preparation for missions that hadn't existed yet. "You're telling me my entire career has been planned by some Pentagon office I've never heard of?" "Not planned," Torino corrected. "Guided. The skills were always yours, Rodriguez. The dedication, the tactical thinking, the leadership ability, that all came from you. But the opportunities to develop those skills, the assignments that built your expertise, the training that prepared you for complex operations, that was deliberate cultivation." He pulled out another document, this one stamped with classifications I'd never seen before. The Office of Strategic Personnel Management was created after 9/11 to ensure that when international crises require immediate military response, we have operators with exactly the right combination of skills already trained and ready. You've been developed as what they call a strategic asset, someone whose expertise can be deployed for situations that might not exist for years. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Every moment of pride I'd felt in earning my assignments, every sense of accomplishment from being selected for elite programs, every bit of validation from advancing through the ranks,
All of it had been manufactured by a system I'd never known existed. "How long have you known about this?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Torino was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a final document from the folder. "Because of this," he said, handing me a memorandum dated just 3 days ago. "Post-mission career trajectory recommendations for Colonel V. Rodriguez."
I read through the document with growing horror. After successful completion of the hostage rescue operation, I was to be transferred to a classified position within the Strategic Personnel Management Office. My role would be identifying and developing the next generation of strategic assets, using the same systematic cultivation that had been applied to my own career. But if the mission failed, if American hostages died under my command, the document outlined a different path. Medical retirement due to psychological trauma, with a generous pension and complete classification of my service record. Either way, my career as an operational officer would be over. I was being prepared for one final mission before transition to a desk job or forced retirement. "They're using me," I said quietly, the full scope of the manipulation becoming clear. My entire career has been preparation for this one operation, and after it's over, win or lose, I'm done. "That's the part that bothers me most," Torino said. "You're not just an asset to them, Rodriguez. You're a disposable asset. They've invested 8 years in developing your skills, and now they're cashing in that investment for one high-stakes mission. After that, you're too valuable to risk in the field and too dangerous to leave in operational command." The briefing room noise filtered through the walls, reminding me that in 30 minutes, I would be leading a team into one of the most dangerous operations in military history. But now I understood that my success or failure wasn't just about saving American lives or advancing my career. It was the culmination of a systematic program that had been shaping my entire adult life without my knowledge or consent. "There's something else," Torino continued, pulling out a personnel file I'd never seen before. "Your family situation isn't accidental either. The Office of Strategic Personnel Management prefers operators without strong civilian ties. People who are emotionally isolated are more likely to take extreme risks and less likely to compromise missions for personal considerations." My blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your family's rejection of your military service might not be entirely natural. The program has methods for ensuring that strategic assets remain focused on military objectives rather than civilian relationships. Subtle interventions, information sharing that creates tension, psychological profiles that help predict family dynamics." The folder contained communication records showing that someone from the Office of Strategic Personnel Management had conducted family stability assessments on me multiple times over the years. Elena's phone number appeared in the files, along with notes about her civilian mindset and resistance to military culture that could be leveraged to maintain operational focus. I felt sick. Not only had my career been manipulated, but my family relationships had been systematically undermined to ensure my dedication to military service. The very isolation that had driven me deeper into military culture had been engineered by the same system that benefited from that dedication. "Why are you showing me this, Torino? What am I supposed to do with this information?" He looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy and part determination. "Because in about 25 minutes, you're going to walk into the most important mission of your life, and you deserve to know whether you're doing it as a free agent or as a programmed asset. Those Americans in Kurvaska need to be rescued, and you're probably the best person to do it. But you should make that choice with full knowledge of what you're really part of." The weight of the decision pressed down on me like tactical gear in desert heat. I could refuse the mission, demand a full investigation of the Strategic Personnel Management Program, and possibly destroy my career while accomplishing nothing for the hostages who needed rescue.
Or I could complete the operation knowing that every aspect of my preparation had been manipulated, that my success would be the culmination of a systematic program designed to use and then discard me. But as I sat in that conference room, holding evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal of my adult life, I realized something that Torino probably hadn't expected. Knowing the truth didn't change what I needed to do. Americans were going to die in 6 hours if someone didn't save them. And regardless of how I'd been prepared for this moment, I was still the best person to ensure they went home alive. The manipulation was real. The career guidance was calculated. But the skills were mine, the dedication was genuine, and the mission was still critical. Standing up from the table, I handed the folder back to Torino. Thank you for showing me this. But those hostages don't care whether my training was orchestrated or organic. They just need someone who can get them out alive. For the first time since I'd known him, Sergeant Major Torino smiled. Now that, he said, is exactly why they were right about you. I was reviewing final approach vectors for the Kravaska Embassy insertion when my satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number that made my blood freeze. Channel 7 News, Millbrook Springs. The same local news station that had covered my high school graduation ceremony 12 years ago was calling me in the middle of the most classified operation of my career. Colonel Rodriguez, this is Jessica Martinez from Channel 7 Evening News. We understand you're currently deployed on a military operation related to the hostage situation in Kravaska. We'd like to get a statement from you about your family's concerns regarding your mental fitness for combat duty. The words hit me like incoming artillery. I'm sorry, what did you say? Your sister, Elena Rodriguez Chen, contacted our newsroom this morning with concerns about your psychological state. She provided recordings of a phone conversation where you allegedly made threats and described paranoid delusions about being in danger. She's worried that the military is deploying someone who may be experiencing a mental health crisis.
The conference room around me seemed to tilt sideways. Ma'am, I need to clarify that this is a classified military operation, and I cannot provide any statements to media regarding we're planning to run the story tonight at 11. Martinez has agreed to an on-camera interview about her concerns for your well-being. She says the family has been trying to get you psychological help for years, but that you've refused treatment and become increasingly isolated and paranoid. I stepped outside the briefing room, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Through the window, I could see teams of special operations personnel making final preparations for an operation that would determine the fate of hundreds of American lives. And while I was supposed to be focusing on tactical coordination and mission success, my family was actively sabotaging my reputation on local television. Ms. Martinez, my sister is not qualified to assess anyone's mental fitness for military duty. I'm currently involved in a critical operation that she provided medical documentation suggesting you've been exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid thinking patterns. According to her statement, you called the family this morning making wild claims about presidential authorization and life-or-death missions that sounded delusional. The medical documentation stopped me cold. I'd undergone routine psychological evaluations throughout my military career, all of which had been classified and confidential. Elena shouldn't have access to any of my medical records, let alone the ability to provide them to news reporters. Where did she obtain medical documentation? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. She says it was provided by a concerned military official who wished to remain anonymous, someone who felt the public had the right to know when potentially unstable personnel are deployed in sensitive situations. The Office of Strategic Personnel Management. They weren't just manipulating my career trajectory, they were actively managing my public image to ensure that any attempt to expose their program would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a psychologically unstable officer. Elena thought she was protecting me from a dangerous deployment, but she was actually participating in a systematic effort to discredit me. Ms. Martinez,
My sister is not qualified to assess anyone's mental fitness for military duty. I'm currently involved in a critical operation that... She provided medical documentation suggesting you've been exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid thinking patterns. According to her statement, you called the family this morning making wild claims about presidential authorization and life-or-death missions that sounded delusional. The perfect catch-22. Any attempt to defend myself would be characterized as evidence of paranoia. Any explanation about the manipulation of my career would sound like conspiracy theories. Elena's interview would paint me as a mentally unstable officer whose family was desperately trying to prevent a psychological breakdown in a combat zone. When does this story air? I asked, already knowing the damage was inevitable. Tonight at 11. We're also posting segments online throughout the evening. Elena's interview will be featured prominently along with expert commentary from psychologists about the warning signs of military-related mental health crises. I ended the call and stood in the corridor, watching through the window as the most elite military operators in the country prepared for a mission that required absolute trust and confidence in leadership. In 8 hours, while I was potentially rappelling into a hostile embassy compound, local news would be broadcasting my sister's concerns about my mental stability to an audience that included military families, Department of Defense personnel, and anyone with internet access. The timing wasn't coincidental. The Strategic Personnel Management Office had orchestrated this media assault to ensure that if I survived the mission but attempted to expose their manipulation program, I would already be publicly established as an unstable officer with a history of paranoid delusions. Elena's genuine concern for my well-being was being weaponized against both of us. Major Collins appeared in the corridor, his expression grim. Rodriguez, we have a problem. Someone leaked information about your family situation to the press. Command is concerned about potential security breaches and wants to reassess your mission assignment. Sir, I can explain. Actually, you can't, because explaining would require discussing classified personnel management programs that officially don't exist, which puts you in the impossible position of being unable to defend yourself without compromising national security. The sophisticated nature of the trap became clear. The Strategic Personnel Management Office had created a scenario where any attempt to reveal their manipulation would result in charges of revealing classified information. Elena's media interview would establish my reputation as mentally unstable, making any future accusations against military leadership appear to be the delusions of a traumatized veteran. When does this story air? What's Command's decision regarding my mission assignment? General Ashworth is fighting to keep you on the team. She's arguing that your tactical expertise is essential for mission success and that personal family drama doesn't affect operational capabilities. But there are concerns about potential security risks if your family continues providing information to media sources. Through the briefing room window, I could see General Ashworth engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with senior officers. Her body language suggested she was advocating forcefully for something, presumably my continued participation in the operation. But I could also see other officers shaking their heads and pointing at documents that probably contained security assessments related to the media leak. Sir, I need you to understand that my family's media statements are based on manipulated information provided by sources they believe are legitimate military officials. They think they're protecting me from a dangerous deployment. I understand that, Rodriguez, but from Command's perspective, the source of the leak matters less than the fact that classified operational information is being discussed with civilian media. Your family may not intend to compromise security, but they're being used by people who do.
My phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. Val, I know you'll probably hate me for this, but I couldn't let you go into danger when you're clearly not thinking straight. The military contacted me with concerns about your mental state, and I had to speak up. I love you too much to stay quiet. The message confirmed what I'd suspected. Elena genuinely believed she was saving me from a psychological breakdown in a combat zone. Someone from the Strategic Personnel Management Office had contacted her with carefully crafted information designed to trigger her protective instincts while simultaneously discrediting my reputation and mission fitness. Major Collins, If I'm removed from this mission, what happens to the Americans in those compounds? We proceed with alternative tactical approaches. Other team leaders take on additional responsibilities. The mission continues. But with reduced effectiveness? He was quiet for a moment, then nodded grimly. Your expertise in improvised urban warfare tactics is significant. Losing you would require operational adjustments that increase risk factors for both hostages and rescue personnel. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. My family's well-intentioned media interview was being used to compromise a mission that could save hundreds of American lives. The Strategic Personnel Management Office had engineered a scenario where my personal relationships were weaponized against national security interests. General Ashworth emerged from the briefing room and approached us in the corridor. Rodriguez, you're staying on the mission. Command agrees that your tactical capabilities outweigh security concerns, and we're implementing additional operational security measures to prevent further information leaks. Thank you, General. Don't thank me yet, she said grimly, because in about 6 hours, you're going to be leading a team into hostile territory while local news broadcasts questions about your mental fitness. Every operator on your team will know about the media coverage, and they'll be making split-second decisions about whether to trust your leadership under fire. The psychological warfare was complete. The Strategic Personnel Management Office had ensured that even if I completed the mission successfully, my reputation would be permanently damaged by family members who thought they were protecting me. Elena's interview would follow me for the rest of my military career, a constant reminder that my own family considered me mentally unstable and unfit for duty. But as I looked through the window at the teams preparing for one of the most complex rescue operations in military history, I realized something the Strategic Personnel Management Office probably hadn't anticipated. I no longer cared about protecting my reputation or my family's opinion of my service. 300 Americans needed to come home alive. Everything else was just noise. 20 minutes before final departure, as I was conducting weapons checks and reviewing extraction protocols, Dr. Catherine Brennan appeared at my equipment station with the kind of urgent expression that preceded game-changing intelligence. As the Pentagon's senior analyst for international crisis management, Brennan had access to information sources that most military personnel never knew existed, and her presence at an operational briefing meant something significant had developed. Colonel Rodriguez, I need to speak with you privately, she said, glancing around the busy preparation area where teams were loading helicopters and conducting final communication tests. New intelligence has come in that changes everything we think we know about this operation. Dr. Brennan had been tracking international terrorism networks for 15 years, specializing in the intersection between hostile nation-states and non-governmental militant groups. Her analysis had prevented 3 major attacks on American soil and identified funding sources for organizations that most intelligence agencies couldn't even locate. When she said something changed everything, experienced operators listened. What kind of intelligence? I asked, following her to a secure briefing alcove away from the operational noise. Signal intercepts from the past 4 hours indicate that the hostage situation in Korvaska isn't actually being run by the separatist groups we've been tracking. The real operational command is coming from inside the American intelligence apparatus. The words didn't immediately process. I'm sorry, what did you say? Someone within our own intelligence apparatus is coordinating this operation. The separatist groups are being directed by handlers who have access to classified American military protocols, real-time intelligence about our response capabilities, and detailed knowledge of personnel assignments, including your specific role in today's mission. I stared at the intercepts, trying to reconcile what she was telling me with everything we'd been briefed about foreign terrorism networks and hostile nation-state actors. Are you saying this is some kind of false flag operation? I'm saying this is a test, Dr. Brennan replied grimly, and you're the primary subject being evaluated. She pulled out additional documents that made my stomach drop with recognition. Communication logs showing that someone had been monitoring my family's phone calls for months, psychological evaluation reports that I'd never authorized, and most disturbing of all,
operational planning documents that referred to the hostage rescue mission as Rodriguez Validation Exercise Crimson. The Strategic Personnel Management Office isn't just manipulating your career development. They're using this hostage situation to conduct the most comprehensive evaluation of a strategic asset ever attempted. The American diplomats in those compounds aren't random victims. They're volunteers from the intelligence community who agreed to participate in what they believe is an advanced training exercise. The briefing alcove seemed to shrink around me as the implications became clear. The hostages are intelligence operatives? Not all of them. About 30% are genuine diplomatic personnel who were deliberately placed in vulnerable positions. The rest are CIA and military intelligence officers who think they're participating in a realistic training scenario. They don't know that you're being evaluated under actual life or death stress conditions. I thought about the briefing, the synchronized attacks across 3 countries, the sophisticated enemy tactics that seemed almost too perfectly designed to test every aspect of my training. What about the other locations, Valdoria and Thessia?
Also part of the exercise. The entire multi-theater operation is designed to create maximum stress and complexity while evaluating your decision-making capabilities, leadership effectiveness, and psychological resilience under extreme pressure. The Strategic Personnel Management Office wants to know if their 8-year investment in your development has created an asset capable of handling any crisis they might deploy you for. Dr. Brennan spread out more documents, showing the scope of the deception. The separatist groups are being portrayed by actors with military training. The weapons are real but non-lethal. The compounds have been modified with hidden safety systems. But you're not supposed to know any of this, because they need to evaluate your performance under authentic stress conditions. What about the timeline? The 6-hour ultimatum. Real in the sense that the exercise has actual time constraints. But failure doesn't mean executions. It means you failed the evaluation and will be transferred to administrative duties permanently. Success means you'll be offered command of a new strategic operations unit that officially doesn't exist. The weight of betrayal was almost overwhelming. Not only had my entire career been manipulated, but now I was being subjected to the most elaborate psychological evaluation in military history, with actors playing terrorists and intelligence officers playing hostages, all designed to test whether 8 years of systematic development had created the perfect strategic asset. Dr. Brennan, how did you discover this information? Because I wasn't supposed to, she said grimly. I've been investigating anomalies in international intelligence communications for months, trying to track funding sources for terrorist organizations. What I found instead was evidence of the most sophisticated psychological manipulation program ever developed by American intelligence. She pulled out a final document that made everything click into place. The media interview your sister gave tonight, also part of the evaluation. They wanted to see how you'd perform under maximum personal and professional stress simultaneously. Elena was contacted by SPM personnel who provided her with carefully crafted information designed to trigger exactly the response that would create the most pressure on you. So, my family's rejection, the media coverage, the questions about my mental fitness, all of it is engineered to create optimal evaluation conditions? Not just engineered, carefully calibrated. They've been studying your psychological profile for years, identifying exactly what combination of personal and professional pressures would push you to your limits without causing complete psychological breakdown. Today's operation isn't just testing your tactical abilities, it's testing your capacity to function under the kind of comprehensive stress that strategic assets might face in real-world deployments. The helicopters outside were spinning up their rotors, and I could hear Major Collins calling for final team assembly. In 10 minutes, I would be leading a team into what I now knew was an elaborate theater production designed to evaluate my worth as a strategic asset. But the knowledge didn't change the immediate reality. The mission still required completion, the evaluation was still occurring, and my performance would still determine my military future. Dr. Brennan, what happens if I refuse to participate? If I expose this entire operation? Then you'll be court-martialed for revealing classified information, medically retired for psychological instability, and the Strategic Personnel Management Office will select a different strategic asset for development. The program continues just without you. And if I complete the mission successfully, then you'll be offered command of operations that make today's complexity look simple.
You'll become one of the most powerful military assets in the American intelligence community, with access to resources and authority that most generals never see. But you'll also become completely owned by a system that views you as a valuable tool rather than a human being. The choice was crystallizing with brutal clarity. I could expose the manipulation and destroy my career while accomplishing nothing for future victims of the program, or I could complete the evaluation knowing that success would trap me permanently in a system that had already demonstrated its willingness to manipulate every aspect of my life. There's a third option, Dr. Brennan said, reading my expression. Complete the mission flawlessly. Accept the promotion they offer, and use your position within the Strategic Personnel Management Office to document and eventually expose the program from the inside. It would take years, and it would be dangerous, but it might be the only way to protect future officers from this kind of systematic manipulation. Outside, Major Collins was calling my name for final departure preparation. The evaluation was beginning whether I was ready or not, and hundreds of people, whether genuine hostages or intelligence operatives, were waiting for rescue that only my team could provide. Dr. Brennan, if I agree to this strategy, if I use the promotion to investigate the program from within, what kind of support can I expect? Very little. Maybe 1 or 2 allies who understand what you're really doing. But mostly, you'll be operating alone in a system designed to detect and eliminate threats to its existence. I looked through the window at the teams loading into helicopters, elite operators who trusted my leadership and tactical expertise. They deserved to complete this mission successfully, regardless of whether the hostages were genuine or the enemies were actors. The skills were real, the training was valid, and the teamwork was authentic, even if the context had been manufactured. Dr. Brennan, I need you to promise me something. If I disappear, if I have an accident, if I suddenly develop psychological problems that require medical retirement, I need you to continue investigating this program. She nodded grimly. I promise. But, Valentina, I hope you understand what you're choosing. You're about to walk into a system that has already demonstrated its willingness to manipulate your family, your career, and your entire life. Once you're inside, leaving might not be an option.
I shouldered my gear bag and headed toward the helicopter, carrying the weight of knowledge that would change everything about how I approached the next phase of my life. The evaluation was beginning, and I intended to pass it brilliantly. Not because I wanted to please the Strategic Personnel Management Office, but because I wanted the power to destroy them. The mission went flawlessly. Too flawlessly. Every tactical decision I made during the Korvaska operation worked exactly as planned. Every contingency I'd prepared for materialized on schedule, and every enemy response followed patterns that seemed almost choreographed to showcase my abilities. We extracted all personnel within 4 hours with 0 casualties and minimal property damage. The other 2 locations reported identical success rates. As we flew back to Joint Base Andrews, I began documenting everything. Using my military-issued tablet, I recorded detailed observations about the mission's artificial elements, how the separatists had retreated at precisely the moments that would allow for maximum tactical display, how the compound layouts had been modified to create ideal demonstration scenarios for urban warfare techniques, and how the entire operation had unfolded like a carefully scripted performance evaluation. Dr. Brennan met me during post-mission debriefing, slipping me encrypted files containing additional evidence she had gathered while I was operational. Communication intercepts showing Strategic Personnel Management Office controllers coordinating the exercise, budget documents revealing the enormous resources devoted to my evaluation, and most damning of all, psychological assessment reports analyzing my performance in real time throughout the mission. "They're already drafting your promotion orders," she whispered during a break in the debriefing. "Command of Strategic Operations, Division 7, effective immediately. Unlimited budget, minimal oversight, and direct reporting to classified Pentagon offices. Everything you'd need to conduct operations that officially never happen." But I was building my own case file. Every document,
every communication, every piece of evidence that proved the systematic manipulation of military personnel for 8 years. I photographed classified materials, recorded conversations with my encrypted personal device, and began mapping the network of officials involved in the Strategic Personnel Management Office. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed access to the source. I needed to be inside their system with the authority to investigate and document everything. 3 weeks later, I sat in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon, wearing the eagles of a full colonel and facing the architects of my manufactured career. General Harrison Blackstone, Director of Strategic Personnel Management, smiled with the satisfaction of someone unveiling his greatest creation. Colonel Rodriguez, congratulations on the most successful strategic asset evaluation in program history. Your performance exceeded every benchmark we established, and we're prepared to offer you command of operations that will reshape American military capabilities for the next decade. Around the table sat the officials who had orchestrated my life. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the psychologist who had designed my family isolation protocols, Colonel Marcus Webb, who had guided my tactical training assignments, and Director Sandra Holloway, who had managed the media manipulation that had turned my own sister against me. Before I accept any assignment, I said carefully, I need to understand the full scope of what you're asking me to command. General Blackstone activated a wall display showing organizational charts, operational budgets, and mission parameters that made my blood run cold. Strategic Operations Division 7 wasn't just conducting military operations, it was systematically identifying and developing strategic assets through the same manipulation techniques that had been used on me. Dozens of military personnel were currently undergoing career guidance designed to isolate them from civilian relationships and prepare them for psychological evaluation exercises, disguised as military operations. What about accountability? Oversight protocols? Protection for personnel who don't meet evaluation standards? There is no oversight, Director Holloway said matter-of-factly. Strategic Operations Division 7 operates under executive authority with no congressional reporting requirements. Failed assets are medically retired with generous pensions and complete classification of their service records. Successful assets like yourself become permanently assigned to operations that officially never happen. The choice that Dr. Brennan had presented was crystallizing into reality. I could accept command and use my position to document and eventually expose the program, or I could refuse and watch someone else take control of an operation that would destroy dozens of military careers through systematic manipulation. I accept command of Strategic Operations Division 7, I said, watching their faces light up with triumph. When do I begin? Immediately, General Blackstone replied. Your first assignment is designing a comprehensive evaluation exercise for Captain Amanda Sterling, an Army intelligence officer who has been under development for 18 months. We want her tested under conditions similar to your own evaluation, but with increased psychological pressure. As they handed me Captain Sterling's personnel file, I realized I was looking at a younger version of myself. Brilliant, dedicated, isolated from family, and completely unaware that her career was being systematically manipulated. Her parents lived in Ohio. Her brother was a civilian engineer who didn't understand military culture, and according to the psychological profile, she was susceptible to family-based emotional pressure tactics. What kind of evaluation scenario are you envisioning? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be horrifying.
We're considering a hostage rescue operation in a simulated embassy compound, with family members contacted by anonymous officials expressing concerns about her mental stability, Dr. Kareen said. Similar to your evaluation, but with enhanced family manipulation protocols. That night, I sat in my new office in the Strategic Operations Division 7 facility, surrounded by files on 43 officers whose lives were about to be systematically destroyed unless I found a way to stop it.
My computer terminal had access to classified databases, communication systems, and operational resources that most generals never saw. I was exactly where I needed to be. Working through the night, I began building what would become the most comprehensive exposé of military personnel manipulation in American history. Using my newfound access, I documented every aspect of the Strategic Personnel Management Office, the psychological profiles used to select candidates, the family manipulation protocols designed to create emotional isolation, the elaborate evaluation exercises that traumatized officers while claiming to test their capabilities. But I also began a different kind of operation. Using my authority as Division 7 commander, I started contacting the 43 officers under development. Instead of implementing their planned manipulation protocols, I warned them about what was being done to their careers and families. Captain Amanda Sterling was my first contact. I called her personally and explained everything: the career manipulation, the family isolation tactics, the planned evaluation exercise that would have subjected her to the same systematic betrayal I'd experienced. "Ma'am, are you saying my entire military career has been manufactured?" she asked during our encrypted conversation. "I'm saying someone has been pulling strings behind your assignments, but your skills and dedication are completely genuine. The question is whether you want to help me expose this program or continue being manipulated by it." One by one, I contacted every officer on the development list. Some refused to believe the scope of the manipulation, others demanded evidence. But enough of them agreed to help build a case that would bring down the entire Strategic Personnel Management Office. Dr. Brennan had continued her investigation from outside the system, gathering evidence about budget appropriations, congressional briefings, and international intelligence sharing agreements that proved the program violated multiple federal laws. When I combined her external evidence with my internal documentation, we had enough material to destroy the careers of everyone involved in systematic personnel manipulation. 6 months later, I sat in a congressional hearing room, no longer wearing a colonel's uniform, but testifying as a civilian witness before the House Intelligence Committee. Beside me sat 12 other officers who had been subjected to Strategic Personnel Management Office manipulation, all of whom had chosen to come forward despite the risks to their military careers. In conclusion, I told the committee, the Strategic Personnel Management Office represents the most comprehensive violation of military personnel rights in modern American history. Officers under their development were systematically isolated from family relationships, subjected to psychological manipulation disguised as career guidance, and evaluated through elaborate deception operations that violated both military ethics and federal law.
The hearings resulted in the complete dissolution of the Strategic Personnel Management Office, criminal charges against 17 officials, including General Blackstone, and congressional legislation requiring oversight of all military personnel development programs. But the most important outcome was personal. As I walked out of the Capitol building after my final day of testimony, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unexpected source. Elena. "Val, I saw your testimony on the news. I'm so sorry we didn't understand what was really happening. Mom and Dad want to invite you for dinner this Sunday. No conditions, no military talk required, just family time. We love you." For the first time in 16 years, the invitation felt genuine. 3 months later, I sat around my family's dining table, wearing civilian clothes and listening to my nephew Tommy explain his science project, while my parents asked normal questions about my new job as a military ethics consultant. Elena had apologized repeatedly for the media interview, finally understanding that she'd been manipulated by people who'd used her love for me as a weapon against both of us. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken destroying my military career to finally earn my family's acceptance. But as I looked around the table at people who were finally trying to understand, rather than judge my choices, I realized something important. Their approval had never been the measure of my worth anyway. The real victory wasn't in their acceptance. It was in choosing to sacrifice my career to protect 43 other officers from the systematic manipulation that had defined my adult life. Captain Sterling now commanded a reconnaissance unit in Germany, using skills she developed through genuine training rather than manufactured crisis. The other officers I'd warned were building authentic military careers based on their actual abilities rather than strategic manipulation. And somewhere in Ohio, a young military officer received a promotion based on merit rather than psychological evaluation, never knowing that her career trajectory hadn't been predetermined by people who saw her as an asset rather than a human being. That night, as I drove home from my first real family dinner in over a decade, I thought about the Black Hawk helicopter that had landed in my yard on Christmas morning. It had carried me toward the most important mission of my life, not the manufactured hostage rescue, but the choice to risk everything to protect others from the system that had owned me. Elena had been wrong about one thing in her Christmas voicemail. Military stuff didn't always come first with me. Sometimes the most important military mission was making sure that human dignity came first instead. 2 years later, I received a wedding invitation from Captain Amanda Sterling. She was marrying a civilian teacher who understood that her military service meant sacrifice and who supported her deployment schedule without making her feel guilty about her dedication to something larger than their individual comfort. In the margin of the invitation, she'd written a note. "Thank you for showing me that family support should strengthen you for your mission, not weaken your commitment to it. You saved my career and my relationships." I kept the note on my desk as a reminder that sometimes the most important victories happen when you choose to protect others rather than protect yourself, and that the people who truly love you will find ways to support your service rather than asking you to apologize for it. The Strategic Personnel Management Office was gone. The systematic manipulation had ended. And 43 military officers were building authentic careers based on their genuine abilities rather than manufactured crises. Not every mission has a body count, but every mission has a purpose. Mine had been to ensure that military service remained a calling rather than becoming a prison. Mission accomplished. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss an upload from us.